This is the Snodgrass podcast. Thank you guys so much for joining me on today's episode. I got an amazing guest, Kim John Payne. He's a family consultant and the author of Simplicity Parenting, which is a book that has absolutely changed my life. If you have children, you have got to read this book. Before I get talking about Kim John Payne, please go to the YouTube channel and subscribe to the Snodgrass channel. Appreciate that, guys, and hit that notification bell, and you'll get all the videos that come out each week. We got some amazing content that talks about unlocking true freedom and entrepreneurship that's coming your way. Who is Kim John Payne? Like I said, he's the co-author of Simplicity Parenting, which is a book that is changing families' lives. He says that in today's busier, faster society, it's waging an undeclared war on childhood. We got too much stuff, too many choices, too little time. Children are becoming anxious. They have trouble with friends in school, and they're even being diagnosed with behavioral problems. And he believes that they are some steps to a simplification process in this book that is going to change your life, take your kids back, be the parents that you always wanted to be, and have your children be the children that they've always wanted to be as well. Let's get you the interview with Kim John Payne. Thanks for being on the podcast today, Kim. How are you?
Yeah, doing well, Brett. Been looking forward to speaking with you. Thanks for the invitation.
Yes, definitely. I have reread your book multiple times. My wife, Karen, has read the book. It is changing our lives, and we're trying to implement and execute Simplicity Parenting into my house, which has 4 children, and I call us the chaotic Snodgrass home, and that's just what we've been living in the last few years. So this book is, trying to execute this into our family has just been life-changing, and I want to just go back. I mean, this book was published in 2009, but now it's 2021. Things have gotten a lot faster, a lot busier. We have so much going on. We got social media, activities, toys, stuff, and everything. But I want to just ask you, what was your inspiration for writing Simplicity Parenting?
Yeah, it began a while back when I was actually as a younger guy. I was studying at college, studying psychology, and actually I'm okay now, Brett. I always add that when I ever say, I'm a long recovery. But I was working in a group home in the evenings. I was working and living, and these kids were typically, they're coming. They were pretty overwhelmed. Life was overwhelming, and at the time, there was a lecturer who was coming out of the Second World War, Korean War, Vietnam War, and he was a doctor, and he was talking about stress-related, what he called trauma response back then. And the more he talked about trauma response, the more he was talking about combat veterans that weren't doing so well. I was thinking about the kids in the group home because he was describing them, hypervigilant, nervous, jumpy, really suspicious of anything new, over controlling. Oh my goodness, it's just so over controlling. The kids trying to control their environment in an out of control world. And I spoke to him quite a lot. I really kind of moved into that area, and he was good enough to spend time with me. And then I went and I volunteered in Southeast Asia, which at the time was sort of like the Middle East now. It was socially on fire. And I was working in a number of war zones there and a number of refugee camps, and like the Thai Cambodian refugee camps. And there I saw it again: nervous, jumpy, hypervigilant, over-controlling kids who would startle very easily, emotional, so-called hair triggers. Then I moved to the West after my time was done there, after my tour was done. I moved to the West to study this a bit more. I did postgrad study, but I opened a counseling practice. And through the door came nervous, jumpy, hypervigilant, over-controlling kids. They just looked like wartime kids. And I came to think of it as the undeclared war on childhood. It's like, because these kids didn't have anything in common apart from unrelenting, moderate to low grade, and at times high grade stress, which was cumulative. And to be honest with you, Brett, it was quite disturbing because when I was doing my postgrad study, I thought, okay, I'm leaving war zones behind. I'm moving to London in the UK. Okay, this is all right, good, phew. And when these kids started walking through the door, I didn't, that feeling where you just don't want to see something. I wanted to leave that behind, but there they were. And as I followed up the patterns, I realized that it was the modern pace of life that was building a toxic charge. And you couldn't point to one thing or another because it was so ubiquitous. It had become the new normal. And the new normal was meaning that our kids were just becoming overwhelmed. Their capacity to absorb all this and make meaning of it was being overwhelmed. Their behavior was being really badly affected. And so we started a very simplification regime. I realized, I sort of thought, well, hang on, if stress is cumulative, these kids look like they're in Vietnam, but they're not. They're living in typical families. Mm-hmm. They're not in Vietnam. They're not in Indonesia. What's going on? And I thought, well, is it possible that stress is cumulative? Because a lot of, back then in the early 80s, there was brain imaging equipment becoming available for non-medical uses. And a lot of information was coming out about what we now know. It's so normal. We know about fight or flight now, freeze or flock. We know about amygdala, the fight or flight brain, and the sort of reptilian. That's sort of common now, but that was emerging information. And so I thought, well, I had a pretty simple thought. I didn't have enough advanced degrees yet to be too complicated. I had a fairly simple thought. And the simple thought was, well, what about if it's cumulative? Can stress be cumulative? And if it is cumulative, what about if we unstress? What about if we unstress? So we started unstressing these kids' lives, and there were lots of them. And I can't tell you how many parents said to me, I feel like I got my little kid back. I feel like I've got my little boy back. They're just gone. And so they said, can we keep doing this? And I said, well, yeah, And the same, my principle, and I wrote about this in the book, was that all kids are quirky. They've all got their own little things that make them lovable and kind of infuriating. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You got four,
I do.
Yeah.
They are quirky.
But it's quirky and lovable, right? But if you add the super fast paced, too much, too soon, too sexy, too young, if you add all that to a kid's life, that quirk becomes overwhelmed, and kind of just like a virus overwhelms our natural body's immunity, the fast pace of life overwhelms a child's emotional immunity. And they start to become fevered, and they start to have this sort of emotional viral load, overwhelm their natural resiliency, and their behavior becomes kind of fevered. And it's still them, but it's a fevered them. It's a amplified quirk.
Yeah. And
what we found is that as we simplified, as their lives were dialed back, and went in whatever way we could, because we've all got different constraints on what we can do. But as we dialed their lives back, they became quirky again. But here's the amazing thing, and it still moves me to this day. And, Brett, we've got over 1,200 simplicity parenting coaches all around the world. There's a lot of people in a lot of different cultural environments. And it still moves me every time I hear it. And I hear it a lot, is that their quirk becomes their genius. The same thing that is their quirk is their gift or their disorder. And I'm not denying certain kids have quirks that lead them into ADD, ODD, PDD, OCD. There's no shortage of Ds. We've got lots of Ds. But the beauty of that is that if we can calm their lives down and give them, it's almost embarrassing to say, but give our children a childhood, then those quirks actually become their gift and their genius. So that's a long answer to it, but that's your fault because it was a really good question.
No, that's amazing, and it's exactly what we're talking about. It actually really hits home for me. So I have a 7-year-old boy, and 2 years ago was diagnosed with one of the Ds. He was diagnosed with ADHD, and it was funny because I just got back from my dad's 70th birthday party, and I was looking at all my cousins, talking to all my cousins, and every one of them had a son that had been diagnosed with with one of the D's. And this is right before this interview, and I said, this is very, very interesting, is why is this happening, right? Because I don't think this is happening years ago. And do you think that it is related to the modern pace of life? And in your book, it's almost like we don't even know it, but you related it to the frog in the boiling pot of water, right? That if you boil a pot of water, you put a frog in it, the frog will jump out. But if you have a cold pot of water, put a frog in it, and then boil it, the frog will boil to death. And do you think that's the same thing happening? It's like we don't know. We're just so used to the modern pace, and this is where all this is coming from, the disorders.
Yeah, it's not singularly, but it's a really major piece in it. And I think our boys are particularly in danger because boys need time. Really, in the video I made, which actually is available on our website, it's called The Overwhelm of Boys. If any of your listeners want to sort of take a deeper dive into that, they can. It's free. It's right on the Simplicity Parenting website. Boys need time. But we process slower as males. Those of us identify as males. And I'll be moving between he, she, and they all through our conversation. I don't want to be binary about it. But just the neurology of boys, time. And with things speeding up so much, it's almost like, the way I think about it is that just sort of pictorially, is that there's a vessel all our kids have got. They can contain a certain amount in any given day. After that, we know they get grumpy. We know it's just too much for them. But if you sort of grow that out to their life in general, they've got this vessel and there's a tap. Just imagine there's a tap pouring into this vessel, and it's good. It's okay. It's what's coming in is what's able to be. I'm drunk from. It's all right. But if too much water is coming into that, too much life's moving too fast. There's too many activities, too many play dates, too many clubs, too much information, too much screens, too much is coming into that vessel. There'll be spillage. And that spillage is what we call behavior. It's what we call disorders. Now, we can make a choice. We can spend our life mopping up spillage, or we can turn the tap down. And we can sort of zoom about and have a very, very busy life getting all these therapies. But often the therapies are a part of the problem because they make us so busy to get them all, right?
Yeah.
And it's not that they're not good stuff. Many of them are really excellent. But if we want to have maximum, what's the American saying? Bang for buck. I'm learning all these sayings.
Yeah.
They're often about
you get enough bang for your buck. Yeah.
Bullets and money. I don't know. There's so many. But if we want to get that maximum advantage from the help that is available for our kids these days, we'll just do less. We'll create some space in that cup, right?
Yeah.
So that we are taking them along to get some extra tutoring for math or whatever the issue is going on, it doesn't become a part of the overwhelm. So it's not that girls, and those identified as girls don't experience the same sort of thing. There's an overwhelm of early sexualization for girls going on, which is another whole subject. But I do think that it's not just our modern diagnostic capacities that are doing this. I think it's I don't think it's the pace of life. I know pretty much. I don't know much in my life, but I do know that when you dial the pace of life back, we've had hundreds of thousands of kids regain emotional balance and resiliency again through doing that, without the need to pathologize, because that's another tendency that we've got going on. Like you mentioned, ADHD. The way I look at it is attention deficit is such a silly name. It's not deficit, it's excess. It's not a deficit of attention.
Yeah.
But it is an over and under focusing, because the child's got a lot of adrenaline going, a lot of cortisol going, and it's all okay at the right time, at the right place, with the right people. But for a lot of kids, because the pace of life, just the simple pace of life, is moving too fast, their timing is off. They're perfectly great little kids. It's just that their timing is consistently off because they're in survival mode. And when you've got to survive, you're not really, that's a self survival. You're not really interested in reading the social signs of others. You're just trying to survive. And so it reads as being inappropriate. It reads as being defiant. It reads as pushing back and sullen and being crazy with you, and all this sort of stuff. But once life calms down a bit, then a kid's need to survive calms down.
Mm-hmm.
And then their timing, it's the same thing, it's the same quirk, but now it's well timed and it's appropriate and it's their gift.
Yeah.
And that's what we're just discovering over and over and over through the last 30 years. It's a real consistent pattern.
Yeah.
It's
And
really
it,
hopeful.
and that's the same thing with my son. Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, he can really focus very, very well. He focuses for hours on something he's really interested in. It's just there's so many transitions, and that's the thing. I'm always just like, we have to really limit the transitions because he can't go from so many transitions, and that's what families do. They go from this to this to this to this because their schedules are so packed. And I want to just dig into the book and really just talk about the simplification so I can get our audience to really know what this is. So I think we all say that we're busy, and if you ask someone, "Oh, how's life going?" typically one of the responses would be, "We're extremely busy," especially with kids, and and I think we all want to simplify. And so what does that exactly mean? So, when I think of simplification, I always think of, well, I'm going to get rid of a bunch of stuff, right? I'm going to go through all my stuff and get rid of all my stuff. And that's one part of the book that it talks about simplifying your environment. But basically you have 4 things that you dig into the book. You talk about simplifying your environment, your rhythms, your schedules, and then filtering out the adult world. So let's just kind of dig into the first one, simplifying your environment. Take us into that.
Yeah, and particularly in present times, the way in which I frame the environment and frame those 4. And by the way, in the second edition of Simplicity Parenting, which came out about 6 months ago, I added a 5th, and that's simplifying and clarifying your family values and leadership, who's in charge. But right now I think about it of in here and out there. Out there, the world is really pretty cluttered. There's a lot of stuff going on out there, which is not orderly. It's just the world we're living in right now. So a big part of what gives a child a sense of security is in here, having things pretty stripped back, pretty simple. So that there's a feeling of orderliness. It's not so much just the decluttering. It's that it's just that out there in the world, it's so kind of choppy right now. So when we declutter in here, it gives a child a feeling of restfulness. We can say to a child over and over, "You're safe, mummy loves you, daddy loves you, you're safe, you're safe, you're safe." And that's good. That's great. We say that, but children are very visual, very, very, as we know, very visual. And when they look around an environment that's peaceful and that's pretty well organized, then they know the words are actually authentic, because we can say it, but now they're seeing it. Saying it and seeing it is a pretty great combination. So that's the environment. I mean, the most kids are kind of deluged with too much stuff. And what I have learned is that what is rare is precious. And so having a little bit of a toy library where you have maybe a dozen or so toys out and maybe another couple of dozen packed away, and all the other 300 or 400 just gone, done, over with. All the merchandising, just all just the crap, it's just gone, it's done. And then you cycle things in and you cycle things out, and it's like an old friend returning. It's beautiful. Same with books. Why not have 2 or 3 or 4 books out, the rest in a library, so that a child can read something over and over and over, and they can soothe themselves because it's very predictable. It's not just a consumerism around books, consumerism around toys. The same with clothes. Just seasonalizing clothes. And so that when they open the cupboard, they get the feeling of spaciousness. And it's
Mm-hmm.
really, and I talked about seeing you're secure, saying you're secure. But there's also a feeling that when a child opens a cupboard and sees or pulls out a drawer and sees space around that stuff, there's a feeling of
Mm-hmm.
spaciousness as well.
Yeah.
So that's the environment. It's not this clutter has a habit of creeping back in from unrelenting grandparents and in-laws and so
Mm-hmm.
on. But once the word gets out that you're weird, basically, once the word gets out that you're trying to live a little bit of a simpler life, a little bit less consumeristic,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit, and once the word gets out, hey, my side of the family, can you guys just pool your resources and just give one gift?
Mm, yeah.
Or, hey, could you not give a gift of a thing? Could you give a gift of time
Mm,
this coming holiday season? Could you, like, whatever it is, whatever you can pull off,
I
that
like that.
feeling of creating spaciousness it's signaling to a kid that what your mum and dad or mum is saying, what your guardian is saying is actually true. It's authentic.
Mm,
It's not just words.
yeah.
That's the environmental side.
Yeah, definitely. When I was reading through that, obviously, I think toys is a major thing. When you got into books, because it's funny that a lot of people, we want to simplify, and there's a lot of things we know we should simplify. When it comes to screen time, we know that's not good for our kids if they're on watching too much television or they're on their computer too much. That's fine. But then you start to hit on books, and it's like, oh, well, that's a good thing. Like, I want my kids to learn to read. I want to enrich their lives with books. And so you're not only talking about pulling back on these things we all know. Okay, yes, I get it. TV, social media, screen time. But then you start talking about things that are good for our kids to pull back as well, right?
Well, again, what's rare is precious, right? My aunt Vera gave me this big yellow book. I can remember it to this day when I was 8 years old, of People of the World, the ancient people of the world. And I read that thing and I read it and I read it. And I was completely absorbed. I knew what the next page was going to do. And I turned the page. And it really gave me the interest in social psychology and social anthropology. That's like, and I found that book years and years and years later, and it was the most dog-eared, raggedy thing. And I absorbed that book. It
Mm,
wasn't like turn the pages, flick, throw it away. Next, please. Turn the pages, throw it away. Flick. Next, please. It was this slowing down and this ability to absorb rather than next, next,
mm-hmm.
next, because that's the ADHD culture. That's the sort of next, please, like whatever. That's and it's not just consumerism on a practical level, it's consumerism on an emotional level. And I worry about kids who they look at it, they play with it, they read it. Next,
Mm-hmm.
what's going to happen to their emotional relationships when they grow up and they get into their own partnerships, marriages, or whatever? It just that A relationship takes time. You need to
Yeah.
slow down. You
Yeah.
can't just be throwing it away. And so that culture, it's almost like a cultural, it's a way of being. We can teach that to our kids, to really value what it is they have, because we all want to raise kids who have this sense of we want to raise them in a spirit of gratitude, not a false sense of entitlement,
Mm-hmm.
right? I gave this lecture at the University of New Hampshire years ago, and they wanted me to think of this spicy title, and I couldn't. All my titles are too nice, apparently. And I said to them in jest, well, we should call the lecture Entitlement Monsters and the Parents Who Enable Them. Right? Brett,
That's
Brett, I was kidding, right? I was kidding. They published it and I hit town and it was there all over the place. And I thought, man, no one's going to come to this lecture. The place was packed. It was a very big auditorium and it
mm,
was just packed because we all have that wish for our kids to be grateful,
yeah.
to have this feeling of there is enough. We don't always have to be getting stuff.
Mm.
And so that for me begins young,
Yeah,
actually.
definitely.
Yeah.
I was funny because I was reading your book and they used to call you Dr. Trash Bag. Is that right? And then because you would do the simplification of toys in the environment. And one question I think that you get asked often is, okay, I know that I should simplify my kids' toys. Let's say a kid has 500 toys typically, right? And to simplify, but like how many toys should a child have out? And you talk about the library, which I think is good. So you're not, saying, hey, get rid of all the toys, leave one. You're saying, let's just swap them in and out. But how many toys should be out for a child?
Yeah, one of the things both myself and our coaches over the years have noticed is that when we help parents declutter and simplify, it's a lot of the stuff that remains, the toys that remain at the end of the day, literally at the end of the day, from simplifying a child's room, are the toys that are very basic. They're very dear. They've either had them over the years or they just don't do much. There's like, it could be a dolly if it's a young child. It could be a dolly and it's just torn and raggedy and being patched, and it's not this fabulous. Like a parent I went to years ago, I went to their house, and there was this amazing car which a kid could sit in, a 7-year-old could sit in, and it was a car with a full blown car. And it was unused, completely unused. And I looked at it and went, wow, that's amazing Jeep, a kid's Jeep. Whoa, and I said, but he's not using it. And the mum said, come, I want to show you. The box that the car came in was falling apart. It had been a rocket ship. It had been a store. It had been so many different things. It was the box that the kid played with, not the car. Now he might get around to playing with the car for a bit, but it's the toys it's the construction material. It's the simple toys. Those ones tend to be the ones that are naturally very dear to kids, and we want to keep them.
Yeah.
Partly it's because they're dear to them because they've been creative with them and they've poured their imagination into them. A lot of other toys, the toy maker has been the imaginative font, right? So the toy maker has made this incredible thing, but what do you do with it? Because it's already a finished product. How do I put my imagination into that thing? If when I push a button and it does this, I push, and all I do is sit and push buttons, and it's just kind of complete. It's someone else's creativity. It's like that with screens too. It's the software, the programs can be creatively brilliant, but it's someone else's creativity. It's not our kids' creativity. It's outsourced creativity.
Yeah. And it's funny, I think this was also in your book that you talk about the raggedy doll. And let's say a little girl is playing with a raggedy doll and you're like, oh my gosh, she really loves dolls. So what do you do as a parent? You want to get her more dolls or friends for her dolls. So now she has a doll family, and then that doesn't work, right? It's now they've become devalued.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it is. And yeah, and it's like the stock market.
Anyways, let's move on to the second. So we talked about the environment, simplifying your environment, decluttering toys, books, making it a safe, spacious place. But we also dig into rhythms. So simplifying rhythms. And I think one of the things you really talked about was the importance of family dinners. You have themed dinner nights, and kind of talk about the rhythms and what does that look like?
Yeah, and now coming back to the principle of out there, in here. Out there, life has become very choppy. It's like it's this, then it's that, and how is this going to go? And then, life is pretty unpredictable at the moment. And that's beyond our control, all right? That's beyond our. Do you remember that the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People?
Yeah.
To know the difference between your circle of control and your circle of concern. And a highly effective person works within their circle of control. Well, what we can control, and all we can control really in this area, is what we do at home, whether the schools are in, out, hybrid. Like, we can't control that. We can't control a ton of stuff that's going on right now. but we can really heavily influence rhythms in our home to give a child see what rhythm does and predictability. And we have meal times roughly at the same time each day. When we have bedtime, and it's not just at the same time, it's in the same way. Like talking about little kids, you're saying you have a 7-year-old, Brett, like for little kids, like I come up into the bathroom, it's nighttime. I know that I've just had my dinner. We make puzzles after dinner. Then we, like, whatever it is, we tidy up together. Then we have a puzzle. Then it is we do. I have a time with my daddy, or then we go upstairs. Then my pajamas go on that hook. I get into bed. I get into the bath, and my bath mat is the one with the turtles on it. I get in and I have my dinosaur to play. Then I get out, and that's my toothbrush, and that's in my cup, and that's in my place. Those are like little breadcrumbs to sleep. It's like following. And I think of those, the way I think about it is that rhythm is the big when, and the little rituals are the how. And when a child has the rhythm and the ritual, the when and the how, that's a child's nervous system that's resetting after a busy day. That's a child who knows what's coming next, pictures it, and then it happens. And again, that's showing a child they're secure.
Yeah.
Their nervous system's reset. And really, one of the things that many parents have commented on is that where there are problem spots, you mentioned before, Brett, about transitions. Where there are problem spots, and transitions are often them, is you introduce rhythm so that you rhythmically, the time we get in the car to go to school or whatever is now, and we do it in this way. These are little rituals. Here's how we do it. If there's problem spots around getting to bed, then here's the time we do it, and here's the little rituals we do. It doesn't make it effortless, but boy, if you do it enough, it's like the kids get into a slipstream. And what rhythm does is it creates a sense of security and safety for a child. And it means the adrenaline and cortisol can start settling down. And for modern kids, it also means the dopamine can start settling down, because a lot of the kids are high on dopamine because of screens, because of gaming and YouTubing and all that sort of stuff. The pleasure reward that screens bring. And if you're trying to tell a child to clean up their room and they're high on dopamine, pleasure and reward, cleaning up a room is going to be rejected because it's not pleasurable, it's not rewarding, and we've set our kids up through iPad and gaming and such to be dopamine junkies. Well, one of the ways we can at least have a fighting chance of having our child tidy up is that if it's rhythmical. If it's rhythmical and they know it's going to happen next, and then you do it with a child, and it got that little rhythm going on of we pack away at this particular time, it's not as it's not the big dopamine dump that Minecraft or whatever buys you, but it is an altogether more warm, enduring, I'm tidying up or whatever it is with my daddy, and we're just chattering away to each other. It feels good. And so rhythm is a huge part for me, particularly, if I was writing that book today, the rhythm would be by far the largest chapter.
Yeah.
Because life is so choppy, and it's going to be for a while for kids. That is what I think. If we can pay attention to predictability, and look, if we can be predictable about things, even if the next day is going to be a bit choppy, that night or that day at supper time, dinner time, if we can give our kids a little bit of a heads up of what's coming the next day, even though it breaks rhythm, then at least they know what's going on. Like predictability is like the sort of younger sibling of rhythm and ritual. And to have a little bit of a like at supper time, if you can get to have dinner time with your kids, just to be able to say, like with my kids for years and years, we would have a best thing about the day that was, and a worst thing. And then we'd have a best thing about tomorrow and the worst thing. And it made for really a good conversation flow at supper time, because we never had phones on table on the dinner, like all that sort of stuff. We
Mm,
turned everything off. The ringer went off, the answer machine went off, the cell phones, everything went off.
mm,
One of my kids took to running across and turning the refrigerator off because it made this buzzing noise. So it would just go, like when the power gets cut,
mm.
you realize how quiet things can actually be.
Yeah,
And it's always a pity when the power comes back on again, you know.
yeah.
Um, but just to have that feeling, it's like a Sabbath. It's like a daily little hour of Sabbath
Mm-hmm.
around supper time, or to have these little moments of what I call them decompression, where you just can decompress. That's a little bit that third thing about scheduling, where I talk about giving kids at least 2 or 3 moments a day of at least 30 minutes just to reset their neurological systems and to decompress.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you picked this up, Brett, when we were talking earlier, and wrote earlier, being able to deal with boredom, and just being able to deal with kids being bored,
Yeah.
and let them decompress. Yeah.
And I want to talk. So we talked about rhythm, guys. So very, very important. That's one thing we've been trying to implement. And as an entrepreneur, talking to mostly entrepreneurs, we know how important it is for us to have that morning routine, that evening routine, and some sort of routine that we do every single day. But we forget about our kids. So setting that rhythm up, guys, very, very important. And one of the things that we do at dinner time, kind of like you, we do best and weirdest. So it's like, what was your best part of the day? What was your weirdest part of the day? And sometimes that brings up some funny stories. But let's talk about schedules a little bit. So the third thing is simplifying your schedules. And again, just going back to, as parents, we want to enrich our kids' lives. We want them to experience a lot of different things, to have some diversity in their life, because we don't know what they like, right? So we put them in karate class, basketball practice, baseball, sports, dance, music, in whatever foreign language, and we want to enrich them, so then once they figure out what they like, then they go for that. Again, like we think that all these things are good, but you again in your book say we need to pull back, and one of the things you said here is the magic is that free unstructured time. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, the scheduling, it's kind of interesting, this thing, because we can almost use the word enrichment, Brad. It's almost like it's almost like a way of thinking. Do we see childhood as an enrichment opportunity where we've got to get everything into the first 8 years that would normally take 18? You
Mm-hmm.
just got to get everything in, right? Or rather than seeing it as an enrichment opportunity, do we see it as a unfolding experience? Like which way do we want to think about childhood? The the temptation to want to get our kids everything. It's I'm often reminded of my grandfather, my father and grandfather. My grandfather in particular went through the 30s, right? He went through the Second World War, the economic crash. And we often call these people the greatest generation. And honestly, I think we're standing on the ground that they built quite often.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a lot to be grateful for. But these people built something out of nothing, really. So why do we think giving our kids everything now is going to make them great? It's going to make them entitled.
Yeah.
Just letting them problem solve is just hugely important. I was driving in a car a few years ago, and I heard this report uh, that said, this is back in, gosh, it's a while ago now, 2016, that 32% of all employment for millennials was either self-employment, part-time, project-based, right, unbenefited. So I thought 32%. So when I got back to the office, I went into the trade department's website, and I found basically from 2005, 15, I projected to 2025. 2025, it's well over 60% of all employment will be self-employment, right? That is the world our kids are going into.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you and I both know I've been self-employed for 25 years, and and your listeners too, they know as well that I don't know. I guess it's a question to you, Brett. Like, what would you say are some of the key qualities that an entrepreneur or employed person needs? Genuinely, it's a question. What do you,
Yeah.
if you had to sort of list 4 or 5 of them, what would they be?
I mean, most of them are driven. They're creative. I love to create. They don't mind taking risks. I think that's one of the biggest regret. People wish they would have taken more risks. So we're very risk takers, and we like building, creating, innovative. Those are a few.
Yeah, wouldn't you say grit?
Yeah, grit, having courage.
How many ideas come up that don't work out
Yeah.
initially at all? And you could walk away, or you could make what I think of as the 2 degree angle shift,
Hmm.
because the difference between an idea that works and doesn't work is often 2 degrees.
Yeah.
It's not throwing it out; it's just walking around thinking
Hmm.
about it, and what went wrong with that, and how can I? And it's often one small change, and off it goes. I,
Yeah.
I, I, I work with entrepreneurs, I work in the business world as well, and and we're often looking for that. I'm helping people look for that 2 degree shift. Now, all those qualities that you named, all of them pretty much being driven, taking risks. If you're building a tree fort, and okay, I watched a little kid the other day build a tree fort, build a platform, did pretty well, and then he looked up and he looked at a branch, and he got down out of the tree, and when he got these really big nails, probably too big for the job, and a great big hammer, and he climbed up the tree, and he started making the ricketiest looking ladder you have ever seen, going up and up and up. And then he made this tiny little platform. It had to be 40, 50 feet up in the air. I was thinking, wow, these are really good parents allowing the like, whoa. And these things were kind of rickety, but there he was, and he did, and he got up to the top, and he made a little nest. And apparently, I got an email later that he spent most of the summer up there spying
Mm.
on people, right? Now, that's it. If you're going to teach a child to take appropriate risks, if you're going to teach a child to have grit, determination, and the first thing you mentioned, Brett, was creativity. I think that was pretty early on. You
Mm.
said creativity. Then we've got to let our kids be bored.
Mm.
If that's the world kids are going into, they need to be self-creative, self-innovative. They need to be problem solvers, self-motivators. No one gets you up in the morning as an innovator, as an entrepreneur. You
Mhm.
get yourself up. Now, all those qualities come through unstructured play. That's where, and I'm not kidding here. I'm not just saying the soft science. This is where the parts of the brain get myelinated. This is the hard science as well.
Mhm.
Is giving kids unstructured time for them to self-create, sticking them in all these sports clubs, all this structured activity where the structure is built for them, is actually, it's okay, a little bit of that, of course, I don't be silly about it. But for me, the bulk of the time needs to go to this other thing. I was on a TV show quite a few years ago now, maybe 6, 7 years ago, and people were saying, giving kids unstructured time, letting them be bored, just letting. They said, "Oh, that's really sweet, Kim. That's like Little House on the Prairie. That's just
Mhm.
going back in time. Our kids are in the modern world.
Yeah.
They've got to be in all these activities." And I said, "You know what?" And it was 4 or 5 women who were they were spectacularly provocative. It was fun, actually. Um, but they, but I said to them, you know what? It's the opposite. If you're raising your kid with all these activities, all this outer structure, that's the past.
Mm.
That's the job for life, the benefited job for life. That's rapidly fading.
Mm.
The jobs of the future, or not even the jobs, the way of the future is all about self-creation. Now, for the folk listening into this, if we're innovators and if we're entrepreneurs, our kids stand even a greater chance of doing that because they're watching us as well. We look like we're having fun, at least
Mhm.
sometimes.
Yeah.
And we get to set our own schedules. They have to go to school. When I get out of school, I want to be like my mom because she gets to set her own schedule. They don't realize all the other hard parts so
Yeah.
much. But we've got a pretty high likelihood. Both my kids are entrepreneurs and they're just in their late teens, one's in her early 20s, and they're going for it. They're doing their own thing. But honestly, when they came to me and said, Daddy, there's nothing to do, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Or
My son says that all the time. I actually had that written down. Is like my son every few days he will say those words. I'm bored.
yeah. And my response is, I'm bored, or there's nothing to do, is, oh dear. That's it. Or it might go a little further and say something like, oh, when they say there's nothing to do, and I'd say, oh, you know what? Something to do is just around the corner.
Mm,
Isn't that true in
yeah.
life?
Mm-hmm.
Because out of boredom comes creativity. If we can resist putting an iPad in our kids' hands, turning on the screen, if we can just let them be royally bored, and our response becomes really flat. In other words, we out bore the boredom. We're
Mm,
so boring that we don't get bothered by it anymore, because, and then they'll turn away like, and off they go. But 30 minutes later, and by the way, keep the kids separated for that time. But 30 minutes later, they've got these boxes and they're doing stuff and they're into this and they're into that. And it lasts so much longer. And again,
yeah.
this is a pattern of feedback than just sticking a screen in front of them, because that's a dopamine dump. And then when the screen's done, they want more and
Mm,
more and more
yeah.
screen. If we let them be bored, and we might, you might siphon kids into things. You might just sit with them whilst they're starting to do the cutouts or whatever it is they're doing, or making a ramp for their BMX or whatever it is. I'm
Mm,
not suggesting just walking away, but if we can be there without kind of doing too much, it's delicate, isn't it? We want to help them into the next activity, but we don't want to get so involved that it's our thing and they become passive.
right.
And also, we can't extricate ourselves to do our own work.
Mm,
But if we can do that, just let our kids be bored, but be a play. I think of it as being a play presence, as opposed to a play partner. I don't want to be a play partner with a child, but I'm really happy to be a play presence. I'm happy to just, take my sketchbook out and make some notes. Never a phone, because
mm,
that means we've disappeared,
yeah.
down the rabbit hole of technology. But and I'm around while they're constructing their forts or whatever it is they're doing. They're doing their work, because play is work. I remember picking my little girl up from playing with a friend once. I said, "How did it go, love?" And she said, "Daddy, we played really hard today." And she was so satisfied, and she slept so well that night. So that's the
Mm,
scheduling side of things.
yeah.
We've got to really watch this over scheduling of our kids,
Yeah.
because it's not to go back in time. It's because that's the world they're going into.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I just took down a couple of notes here. Is one of the things that I forgot to mention is to be an entrepreneur, business leader, it takes a lot of courage. Like we talk about taking risks, it takes a lot of courage. And it's funny how, we know when we have to solve a problem, we have to have a lot of courage to get through that. But we spend our entire life hoping and creating this space so our children never have to have courage, you know? And that just kind of got me thinking about it. And I think it's just really important to let them experience that. And we always want to step in, and you talk about just being in the presence of play. I think you said this in your book. Parents sometimes feel like they always have to be the entertainer. We always have to come up with all these ideas. And just to kind of talk, hit on that a little bit. So guys, we talked about simplifying the environment, the rhythms, the schedules, and let's just talk about this briefly before we run out of time here. Is just filtering out the adult world. You also said you have revised your next edition of Simplicity Parenting, talking about family values, but filtering out the adult world. This is where it really hits home. Kind of, we talk about the screens, we talk about the media. This is the thing I think we all know, like, hey, we do need to filter this out, but talk about that a little bit, filtering out the adult world.
Well, why didn't Steve Jobs have screens for his kids, Brad?
Because he knew.
And because he didn't,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And the answer, I met up with one of the lead designers of the iPhone a couple of years ago in a workshop I was doing in San Francisco, and he was a good friend of Steve. Steve had this like a small apparently, circle of inner friends, but few of them for many, many years. And he was one of them. And I said, why is that? Why didn't Steve have screens? And he said, well, clearly it's the same reason I don't have screens for my kids. And I said, seriously, you're one of the main designers of the iPhone, and you don't have. He said, no, we didn't design iPhones for kids. We never dreamed parents would give kids these things. We didn't design it for that reason. And I looked at him and he said, yeah, I know, naive, right? I said, oh, yeah. And he said, but I said, what's the reason you don't have a screen for your kid? And he said, well, I'm an entrepreneur. I said, And he said, well, why would I want to give my kid a device that is going to just basically, and the word he used was emasculate as a boy, their creativity. Why would I want to give a device of, and now my words, of mass distraction, right? If we want our kids to be innovative and creative, putting a screen. Now, some parents say, but my kid uses the screen like I was talking to a parent of a teenager, and just saying, but my kid's learning programming. My kid's learning how to actually, he's learning all the sort of the basics and how to make games and how to program and so on and so on. And that's good. Like, that's a tech tool, right? There's tech tools and tech toys, but a tech tool can also be extremely addictive. And there's a place where what's happening is that the creativity that our kids need to internalize is becoming external. And it makes them very passive. And I watched this kid who was coming up to our place, right? He came up 2 years ago, and we have a farm, and he was helping out, and he was incredibly productive. Like, it was amazing. And something happened this year, and he came up and he couldn't concentrate, and he was moving from activity to activity. Today I'll go on and I'll still be cleaning up the stuff that he started and dropped. And I realized, within the first day that he had been given a phone and a computer, and it was startling. One of the things that there was a study done, it's called Learning Habits. It was 55,000 kids over 15 years. Like, who gets to do a research project over 15 years? But they did. And they published it in a book now called Learning Habits. And one of the things that just totally stood out for me with screens is the causative and correlative link between the increase of screen use and the increase of ADHD.
Wow.
And they were almost in lockstep. And the other thing was the increase of screen use and the decrease of problem solving and grit. Now, that for me, like and this was one of the biggest, most thorough studies ever done. And it was a fluke, really, because they didn't mean this, but they just happened to catch kids before the big ubiquitous use of screens, and they tracked it for 15 years. So they really lucked out. And they had just data that we're unlikely ever to gather again on a scale we're unlikely to ever have. And so what I've been recommending to parents because I have a private family counseling practice, I see parents pretty much every day. And what I've been recommending to them, particularly where screen use has become so big over this last year and a half because of kids having to go online for their learning so much, is to look up Victoria Dunkley. That's Dunkley. And she has this a wonderful book called Reset Your Child's Brain. It's almost like this last year we have gorged. It's almost like feeling after the holiday season where you've eaten too much and just feels like, oh man, I just need to have salad. Yeah. I just need to exercise and we do. Our kids are digitally gorged, and it hasn't been their fault. It's just happened. And she has this 1 month brain reset screen detox. And I've recommended it to every parent I work with. And honestly, Brett, I can't tell you how many parents have got back to me saying, I've got my kid back.
Wow.
They're back. I didn't realize how weird things had gotten. Um, so that's another, and her book is sensible too. She's a medical doctor, neurologist. She's very, very highly trained. It's sensible. It shows you how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe in the show notes you can have Victoria's website there, because it's really doable way of filtering out screens, filtering out a lot of the adult stuff that's going on with kids. And again, I get back to out there, it feels a bit unsafe at the moment.
Mm.
So why do we want that information flooding into our homes? Let's have our homes be kind of safe harbors. It's not that our kids won't go out into the choppy seas, they will. I remember being in Cornwall in the UK, seeing, and maybe this is a good way to round up today, but I remember looking out over this seawall. It was a harbour, one of those classic sort of like on the coast of Maine. It was like a bit in Cornwall, similar. Big harbour wall coming around, and the harbour master was there. Would checking the boats that would come in and out, making sure that when they came in, they wouldn't run aground, checking the forecast. But when they came in, the water was really calm, and the boats would reprovision, they would repair,
Mm-hmm.
they would just relax and get ready, right? And then out they would go again. And the little boats would go only a little way, but the bigger boats further. And then the really big ones, they'd go way out, into the reefs, way offshore. And, being a family sort of child psychologist, I was watching this, and you're always thinking about kids when you're in my work. And I was thinking, gosh, that's so like what we want our families to be. We want them to come into home and have that be a safe harbor,
Mm-hmm.
where they can relax and restore and replenish and restock. And it's not that we want that to hold them in a bubble. The little kids, like the little boats, will go out and just sort of putter about, but they'll come back in. The bigger kids, and then the real big ones, like the 18, 19-year-olds, they'll go far away. We hope, if they ever move out of our basement,
Mm-hmm.
but they'll go far away. And it's not that we want to hold them in this realm of unrealism. It's not at all. They'll go out into that world, and they will. They absolutely will. But home can be a safe harbor, and that's what simplicity parenting really aims to do.
Mm. No, I love that. I love that. And I think that's a great, just wrapping up with this simplicity parenting. And I've checked out, like I said, Kim, I've read the book a few times. I've checked out simplicityparenting.com. Our audience can go there. There's a lot of free videos on there, a lot of media articles about this. You also have coaches, simplicity parenting coaches that you talked about. Talk about like if someone's interested, so like this sounds amazing and I want to do something about it. What should they do?
Um, well, I guess first of all, get rid of the toys in your own home. Simplify yourself. Um, but we have a process of coaches and group leaders. It's a very simple training. Well, be ironic if it was complicated, right? It's very simple process, heavily supported, where someone can just get together with a group of people, say, look, okay, this simplifying was really helped me with my family. I see it as a problem all around. I feel a bit weird that I've done this, but somewhere out there that in my community, that my church group, in my school community, whatever it is, there's probably other people, and there are.
Mm.
They're hiding in plain sight. This is something we've found out. And you can just pull people together and convene. It's usually about 4 hours over a couple of months, 3, 4 months. I record a bunch of videos. You put them on, people watch the videos, you turn them off, and there's like a discussion. You lead a discussion, pretty much based, the simplicity parenting one is based on the things we've talked about today.
Mm.
My other, I've written a bunch of books, but the last one I wrote, another example, was called Being at Your Best When Your Kids Are at Their Worst. And that's a book about our own self-emotional regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And so we also have group leaders in that field about emotional regulation as a parent, because every button on our control panel gets pushed as a parent.
Yeah.
And then we have other group leaders who say, yeah, but what I want to specialize in is discipline and guidance and how to set boundaries for kids. So whatever, I mean, we're pretty much, that's the scope of what we need as parents right there. And people can just train very simply as group leaders and then go out. And it's one of the most, I hear it all the time, it's just incredibly rewarding
Yeah.
to sit with other parents, but it also helps us get the strength that we need. A lot of parents these days are doing this online, particularly given the circumstances, are doing this via Zoom
Mm-hmm.
within their own communities. But traditionally, it's been people getting together, sitting in your lounge room, in some church hall, in some classroom in a school, and just giving each other the courage to give our kids a childhood.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Kim John Payne, for being on the show today. Guys, check out simplicityparenting.com. Read the book, Simplicity Parenting. Also, that other book by, and repeat this, John, Victoria Dunkley.
Yeah, it's Victoria Dunkley.
And that is Reset Your Child's Brain.
Yeah, it's and you can see her at victoriadunkley.com,
Awesome.
published by Random House.
That's just amazing. It just reminds me. So about 2 weeks ago, my wife and we had gone through some vacations and we were eating really, really bad. And I went on this detox and I said, I'm going to go on a 5-day detox of food. And I did it. But then now here we are and I don't want a lot of the things I was addicted to, the sugar, to all the sweets. And then now I don't want it. Right. And the same thing I think goes with the child. All of a sudden it's hard at first, but then life is good. You got your
Yeah, one
child
of the
back.
things Victoria often says is that we think it's much, much harder than what it is. Once we start to do a digital detox, it's way easier than we imagined it was going to be.
I love that. Sounds good. This is a wrap. Kim John Payne, thank you so much for being on the Snodgrass podcast. I appreciate you, everything that you're doing. And guys, check out simplicityparenting.com. Get his book. Get all of his books. Amazing. Thank you, Kim.
All right. It's just great to be with you, Brett. Bye for now.
Thank you so much for checking out the Brett Snodgrass channel. If you like this video, please slam on that like button. And if you really like it, then subscribe to our channel here. And remember to leave us a comment below, and I'm going to try my hardest to reply to all the comments. Thank you guys so much. This is why I do what I do. Every single week, I come out with content that focuses on success, freedom, and living out your purpose. Thank you guys so much. See you next time.